It's time for the Mike Hewitt Show, brought to you by RenegadeRiver.com. Well, you know, it's November, and the clouds start hanging around more than they weren't before, so I guess it's just a matter of time that we have to deal with the weather of the season. Is that right, Mike?
It really is right. Listen, folks, we've got a whole bunch of things that we've got to cover in our short period of time. Ludwig von Wiedenhoeft is side shotgun.
Yes.
Shotgun? Yep. Kind of. If you could see him now, you wouldn't wonder why I hesitated. And Miles Bauer, thank you both for helping. Listen, what I want to start off with, we want to dive into some presidential appointments. We've got a couple guests coming up near the bottom of the hour. But before I start, folks, there's another cop shooting in Detroit, and it's not even. The news was barely reporting it now. It's like it's commonplace. Do we live in a society where shooting a cop in the head twice is commonplace and it's not newsworthy? Good Morning America never mentions. I'm going, what kind of culture are we watching unfold? And if we have to park the responsibility somewhere, where do you think it ought to go? Because I put it right at the doorstep of President Obama. One of the things that, of course, ideologically, I entirely disagree with him, but when he was elected, I thought, listen, at least the silver lining here is we can finally put the racial issues beside, perhaps. It's worse now than it has been since the 60s in the race riots. And shooting a police officer in the head isn't newsworthy anymore. Folks, we've got some problems. What say you, Miles Bauer?
Well, I think that was all a part of the plan, was to divide us up so that he could get a lot of his agenda through, because otherwise, normally flyover country would have never gone in for many of the policies that he had. But if he could divide us all up and get us fighting against each other, then that helps him create distractions to get his agenda through.
You know, it would seem to me, and I'm it would seem to me that someone would think that there's more power in uniting people, but that's obviously not the case with some ideologies, including his. I mean, if there are 400 people, having 400 people in agreement would be powerful rather than, 8 little groups of those same numbers. I don't, other than what we've talked about on the show before, where he can go to this community and say what he thinks that they want to hear, and then say absolutely contrarily the opposite to that little group. And so in the end, he comes up with more voter blocks that but wow, that's just contrary to what would build a strong nation to me.
Yeah, but the people's agenda on their power, as you can see, Obama's America has been divide, and then they become stronger. And it's part of the 10 planks.
Well, and doesn't this also go to a borderless world, too, right? If he can blur the lines between what is a strong nation, because does he truly want a strong nation?
I'm going to guess that you won't be singing this afternoon.
No.
Sorry.
I have begun my winter with a cold.
Oh, yeah. I've been there before. One of the shows we had probably a month ago, I was so hoarse I really had to really force myself. So you're sounding great by comparison. I think you're right, and I think it does go to agenda in specifically a borderless world. I mean, when I wrote about it in my first novel, America's Final Beginning, and I've talked about this on the air before, when I was researching what would have to happen to cause my book to be true. And by the way, folks, I started it long before I ever heard of President Obama. And in fact, I stopped writing it for about 6 months when he won, because I thought my timetable's wrong. But I don't think so anymore. I think I was spot on, and I wished I was wrong. But for folks to achieve this global thing that they're wanting, they label everything global. We've talked about that before. Everything the chuck wagons going out west had global items on them, but we didn't call it global back then, because then it was just a matter of free trade and doing business with allies in the world. And now it's global this and global that. Everything's global. And I really do think that's the backbone of pushing it. But I also think he is still a community organizer and just sees these things through a divisive lens rather than a uniting lens. I think part of it just goes to how he views America and community organizing. That's what I think. Ludwig, what are you seeing in schools?
That everything's about globalization.
The teachers, the everything is about globalization.
Yeah.
And listen, to me, it's the epitome of the concept of useful idiot. Now, you mentioned the 10 planks earlier, and what he's referring to, folks, is the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto. Hating to be shrill, but read them. If you haven't, folks, Google it up and read them, and do a check mark as you're reading down the list. Again, I don't want to be shrill, but there's an agenda at play here, and it's actually been in play a lot longer than we've been dealing with President Obama. I don't know where Trump is going to take us, but that's where I want to segue before we find a guest on the line. What are we seeing with appointments, and how do you folks see this plays with what President-elect Trump is doing? How do you believe what he's doing plays with the global side of this conversation?
Well, I don't think he's doing global at all, and I think he's from the people he's already appointed to the people he's talking to. He's exactly the reason why I wanted him, which was I knew he'd put the right people in place, regardless of ideology or differences. He was going to find the right people.
Is there going to be a Secretary of State Mitt Romney?
I'd like so.
What do you think, Miles?
No. I even Gingrich has kind of signaled that would be a bad fit.
Do you think it's a bad fit because of the bad blood between them, or because of Mitt Romney not being qualified for that role?
I think it's partially his qualifications and partially due to his establishment ties.
Okay.
I think you've got so we found out this morning Nikki Haley is going to be UN ambassador, and Nikki Haley was a big Jeb Busher. So you can see President-elect Trump trying to reach out to the establishment and saying, okay, we're one big happy family. We'll give you some appointments here and there. But in the key appointments, like Secretary of State, like Attorney General, I think those are completely different appointments than the, shall we say, the less, well, I don't even know the word to go there with. But, I mean, the Department of Interior versus Secretary of State, two completely different types of spots.
Well, the role that places someone in succession is very, very important. That's how I divide it up. If you're the Secretary of the Interior, yeah, you're in the line of succession, but I need a telescope to see that far. But Secretary of State is not exactly where Haig thought it was, but it's still within eyesight. I'm in charge here, so.
I do think when you guys talk about experience, it's kind of funny. Like Dr. Carson come out and said, I didn't feel qualified to run that position, or then we say Romney isn't qualified to be a Secretary of State. Both of these guys were up for the President of the United States. So if they're not qualified for an individual position, how would they be qualified to actually oversee that entire department's position? So I do think Romney has the ability to be vocal. He has the ability to discuss issues. He knows the issues, foreign and domestic. He was in the running for president. He didn't lose by much.
You liked him. Were you?
No, I was not a Romney guy at all.
You look like a Romney guy. Are you sure?
No, my boy was Herman Cain or Newt Gingrich.
Yeah.
I would have taken either one of them hands down. And unfortunately, the media destroyed both of them, so Romney would get the pathway. But, the other part, too, here is General Flynn, I just heard the other day.
He was a Democrat.
He's a Democrat.
Yeah.
So,
but what we would probably refer to as a blue dog Democrat.
Yeah,
is that right, Miles? I mean,
yeah.
Exactly.
He's not your modern globalist, socialist.
No, like Webb who ran.
He's, okay.
Is that right? Would you compare him to like that?
Wouldn't have been my first, but yeah, okay.
Well, I mean, because when you listen to the Democratic debate with Webb on stage,
yeah,
you would have thought he was the black sheep in the group. What is this guy doing up there? He's not a Democrat.
Well, listen, when John F. Kennedy was talking about making sure that you had arms and knew how to use them, I think General Flynn was probably clapping. That's the kind of Democrat he is.
And I like that he's on board.
Yep, that's my opinion.
And how about the Hawaiian lady? She's a Democrat. She's the only one that didn't go against him, and he's meeting with her now. Yeah,
it's something. Listen, folks, we're going to go to a break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking to Dustin Van Liew, if I'm saying his name right. Folks, we'll be right back.
You're listening to The Mike Hewitt Show.
RenegadeRiver.com is new and used firearms, all priced to sell, plus ammo, reloading supplies, optics, clothing, lasers, and yes, tactical gear. RenegadeRiver.com, family owned right here in Michigan, because you deserve it.
This is News Talk 1090 WKEZ and Talk 1230 WTKG.
The Mike Hewitt Show is brought to you by RenegadeRiver.com.
Listen, folks, if you're just tuning in, Ludwig von Wiedenhoeft and Miles Bauer are my co-hosts, and our guest today is Dustin Van Liew, who is the Director of Regulatory and Government Affairs for the International Association of Wow, I can't go through the whole title, Dustin. Listen, welcome to the Mike Hewitt Show, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning. We're going to talk about some energy this morning. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Just to kind of, first off, we were talking about globalization before you came on. So when I got into the international part of this introduction, I started smiling a little bit too big to keep going, and I don't mean any disrespect when I say that. It just happened to work out with some fascinating timing. But with that, someone's got a phone ringing. With that, what I wanted to find out, there's drilling in the Arctic, or there's not drilling. Which is it?
The administration recently proposed a 5-year lease plan for 2017 to 2022, which actually forestalls any leasing in the Arctic for that 5-year period. So soon to be very little.
So there's energy there, and the Obama administration does not want it. Is that something that if he does it before he bails, before his term is over, that Trump cannot undo?
There's a question there as to whether or not the next administration can reverse it. There's precedent that it has been changed with a new administration. So it can be done, but the Trump administration would have to go through a new rulemaking process with a comment period for the public to weigh in, which could take 6 to 12 months at a minimum. However, it could be done.
I'm watching in the news recently about the big reserves found in Texas, the new reserves for that will require fracking. Is that going to put us back in the same old? It used to be a battle of who can get it first. Now it's a battle of you can't get it.
Right.
What a change in our culture.
Correct.
So what's going on with that, Dustin?
So you are correct. One of the largest finds was recently discovered in the Permian Basin here in Texas. And for the most part, it's on private and even maybe some state land, but private lands, of course, under this administration have continued to develop our resources, whereas this administration has stopped most of federal exploration, both offshore and onshore in the West.
Where would you think that the Trump administration is going to take our energy policy?
Well, from what we've heard publicly during the campaign and since then, he really supports all of the above and reducing the regulatory red tape and burdens on the energy industry so that we can search for those resources and develop that oil and gas resource, including...
I'm assuming that your organization is on board with that type of forward thinking.
Certainly so, yes. Our members provide the geophysical or seismic data and information for the oil and gas companies to safely develop our resources offshore and onshore. Respecting
that there's a difference, Dustin, between the two mindsets on this. One's going to be focused on environment, which, by the way, I think that's wise. I mean, nobody wants to swim in a sea of oil in downtown America, wherever you live. But what's your response to those folks that want to stop the research in the production of oil and natural gas products in terms of saving or not saving the environment? How do you respond to those folks with your forward view on the topic?
Well, it's really not realistic, and it's not necessarily fair to even the developing world to forestall or stop them from having the niceties and the comforts that we live in or live with in America because of our access to affordable, safely developed energy resources. So to say keep it in the ground or stop all drilling is unrealistic. Over 80% of our current, or well over 80% of our current reliance comes from oil and natural gas. Well, and the U.S. is now a leader in that.
I'm a layman here, but if I just get on Google and I develop a position. By the way, if my opinion is one way or the other, I can get on Google or mainstream TV and find somebody reinforcing my position, regardless of what my position is. And
Right.
we've talked about this show often, that a lot of folks, not everyone, so I don't want to get the big paintbrush out, but a lot of folks seek out news sources that reinforce what they believe rather than sources that are reporting news. And I set the question up that way because I'm seeking the truth to you. What environmental risk do you perceive that there is as a result of what we're doing?
Well, certainly there's the outside chance that we see an oil spill or a catastrophe happen, as has happened in the Gulf and in different areas, but it is very limited. And where the geophysical industry comes in is we can actually map the subsurface so that we can locate the resources and develop them more safely. Because as you said earlier, it was a rush to whoever could get it first, whereas now if they have geophysical data, they can target where they are going to develop instead of just really sticking a straw in multiple places in the Gulf or onshore until they hit oil and natural gas.
So that certainly reduces risk. Then, is what you're saying.
Correct.
The other thing I'm reading about, and again, I'm a layman, folks, so I'm not trying to present a view here. I'm just saying what my finds have found. If I look at an oil spill circa 1960 versus an oil spill of recent times, the technology and our ability to contain it and clean it seems to be entirely revolutionized from what completely night and day different. Is that a true statement, or am I lying to myself?
No, I believe that is true, and certainly after the Macondo event in the Gulf of Mexico, industry has put in place various safeguards to keep that from happening in the future. So our industry does learn from it and does apply self-regulation to the industry to ensure that that doesn't happen, because there's huge negative economic impacts for those companies when an event like that happens.
A lot of folks will say that the oil companies are just too rich, and they view this from a classism point of view rather than an energy or environmental view. So those probably are the three factions that we seem to be divided up in. What would you say to the folks that just say the oil companies are too rich? And by the way, they'd probably point at you and say you're part of the problem.
I imagine that is the case, but we have to remember that these oil companies employ our neighbors, our family, our friends. So these aren't just big, bad, faceless corporations. Especially here where I live in Houston, Texas, you can tell that just the price of oil, which is based on market conditions but also regulatory burdens and the like,
right,
has impacted the economy here in Houston, where thousands of jobs have disappeared. So those aren't just some big, bad oil company with a faceless representation. It's actual people. Yeah,
it's always amazed me, by the way, just to make a small point along the path, that when I look at how much money, we'll just pick on Exxon because everybody does, how much money that they make per gallon of gas sold, bottom line money from them, and then I compared that to the amount of federal and state tax that's built into that same gallon. And I'm thinking, if we're really concerned about the economics of that gallon of gas, maybe we're shooting in the wrong direction, but that's just me. And I reflect back, by the way, to me being a child, and I mentioned 1960 earlier, watching John Wayne movies when he's striking oil out in Texas, and everyone was thrilled, and it was an extremely successful movie to see success, because people like to see success. And I think, holy mackerel, has our culture, especially on this particular topic, changed since John Wayne was making movies. Beverly Hill, but listen, when we did an episode on the Hillbillies once. When you talk about the Hillbillies and those shows from that era, I didn't know it when I was a kid, but when I go back and watch them now, they were laden to the brim with uber left messaging, and I didn't realize it. I was a kid, so I guess that's how we got delivered to the door that we're knocking on now. What's the best way forward in our brief amount of time we've got left, Dustin?
Well, look, the current administration has put off limits about 87% of our offshore oil and gas resources through banning exploration. So we're just looking forward to a new administration that will hopefully open some of those areas for new exploration. By 2040, there will be a 40% increase in demand for oil and gas resources around the globe. So this is not something that's going to change tomorrow. We're not going to switch to wind energy and solar energy to fulfill the needs of our population. So it's very important for your listeners to understand that we've got to continue to search for and develop our resources here in the United States.
Dustin, he's waving flags at me. So tell folks how they can find more information from your organization before he throws the book at me.
International Association of Geophysical Contractors.org or IAGC.org.
Say the initials again.
IAGC.
Dustin, thank you very, very much for joining us, sir.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
Okay, folks, we'll be right back.
This is the Mike Hewitt Show.
Renegade River, guns and ammo, and so much more. Old-fashioned service with surprisingly low prices. On M104 at the top of the new 231 bypass in Utica. Or find us at renegaderiver.com because you deserve it.
Now, back to the Mike Hewitt Show on News Talk 1090 WKBZ and Talk 1230 WTKG.
The Mike Hewitt Show is brought to you by RenegadeRiver.com, already into the third segment.
Listen, folks, first off, welcome back for those that have been with us. If you're just tuning in, Ludwig Van Wiedenhoeft and Miles Bauer are my co-hosts, and our next guest, or our guest on the line with us, is Norman Anderson, who's the president and CEO of CGLA Infrastructure and Nonpartisan Global Consulting Firm based in Washington, D.C. Am I saying that right, Norman?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Very good. Listen, welcome to the Mike Hewitt Show, sir.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Good morning.
Good morning. Listen, I don't want to start back by pushing back on you, but you got to help me walk me through the little bit of this. In the opening segment of this show, I whined a little bit about the relabeling of everything as global, and because I'm in fact I hear the word nationalist all the time. I'm really a dinosaur. I'm a state rights guy, so I'm not. All of these titles that get thrown around that seem to be pursuing larger when I want local control government, etc., scare the bejeebers out of me. Having said all of that, tell me what does your organization do, and what? In fact, I've got some notes here, but you're on fire about the Trump administration. So help us understand, Norm.
Well, I think that what we do is we focus on infrastructure and infrastructure investment and making the right kinds of investments so we can create jobs, create businesses, and increase the tax base without raising taxes. So what we're really focused on is how you invest in infrastructure and generate economic growth. And I suppose the global piece of that really has to do with you got to understand what's happening in the global economy so you can make the kinds of decisions locally that you need to make to be successful. Otherwise, you become sort of a victim of events. So that's how I look at that.
Okay, that's fair enough. Tell me what it is that what's the on fire part about the Trump administration? Is that on fire good or bad?
Well, I think it's on fire very good, and the reason is we invest so little in our infrastructure. You guys probably have seen that, have experienced that, and there's so many opportunities for us to grow the economy by creating a strong, world-class foundation in terms of infrastructure. So what I see is that these guys are going to be able to focus on the right issues, reducing regulation, focusing on the kinds of projects that matter, and generating increased private investment in infrastructure projects as well. We just don't have, there's no reason to raise taxes. There's no reason for Washington to have a bigger role in the infrastructure game, but it's really important for the country to start investing a lot more and investing strategically in infrastructure so we can leave something for our children, right? What we've done. Go ahead, sorry.
Just I want to make sure I'm understanding, and listeners also. When you say infrastructure, are we talking about roads, highways, bridges, or telephones and everything? What exactly are you focused on?
Well, I'm focused on everything, and I'm not focused as much on repairing old highways and bridges as I am focused on getting people thinking about what we need. And infrastructure investment's really a strategic investment, lasts for 20 or 30 years, and there's a giant technology wave that's washing over infrastructure right now. So the famous things are things like driverless vehicles and 3D printing, which changes the kinds of materials you use for projects. But I think it's really important. The last part of what you said, I think, is really important. The telecommunications part, the 5G, internet part, giving people a chance to have really good lives without being stuck in traffic or having potholes ruin their automobiles is unbelievably important. But also understanding that, again, 30 to 40-year investments. So you got to think about what your community needs over the next period of time, and see if you can make those investments to make the communities, the country, much more successful.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Miles.
Yeah, I was just curious relative to, Washington has used the device of infrastructure investment for probably ever since the end of the Cold War. And
right.
It's kind of poisoned some of us of a political bent to kind of view that as an evil word, because it really becomes cronyism and almost, if you think about it, the current administration came to power in 2008, and right out of the gates we had shovel-ready nothingness, and they were infrastructure investments. So,
right.
How do you in that industry attempt to change that poison associated
right.
to that word and make it go back to what it truly originally meant?
Yeah, and I think that gets to the fired up part right there. Because I would say shovel ready incompetence. So you had the stimulus, $700 billion. Only $85 billion went to infrastructure, and that was over 10 years. So, getting at your point, I think you've really got to look at. You've got to get serious infrastructure people involved, and you've got to get like you guys were saying at the beginning. You've got to get communities involved in figuring out what their priority projects are and getting those messages to Washington, right, so that they don't interrupt the process. And there's no reason why you can't build those projects and fund those projects locally. What happens and what a lot of people complain about, to me, is, and this is a fact, that an average transportation project takes 9.5 years to work its way through the permitting and approval process, and that's all Washington, 100%. So, so many different levels in terms of the frustration with Washington. Ever since, you're exactly right, 1992, we started to talk about how we need infrastructure, and we haven't been able to think it through or build it, or even, think about this, right? We all say infrastructure. Nobody knows what you're really talking about. There's no infrastructure budget. There's no Office of Infrastructure. There's nobody in charge of infrastructure in the White House. So it's an incredibly frustrating conversation that I think we have a chance to get organized around and look at what the product of infrastructure investment is, which again is more jobs, better jobs, a stronger tax base, and I think better and more interesting businesses that get created.
I think though, Norm, the part of it goes to exactly what Miles was referring to when he said cronyism. The state of Michigan, in example, has just completed, and by the way, grassroots, regular folks lost this battle, but we've just went through a long 3-year protracted war over infrastructure. And the reality of it is that the focus seemed to have a lot more to do with individual pockets of agendas rather than roads and telecommunications and things that the word means, to both of your points. And so it gets to where when folks hear it along with the word globalization, man, we just push back hard, and probably wrongfully. Maybe we need to slow to navigation speed, but we're not hearing anything out of Washington or our state capital here in Lansing, at least, that makes us feel like we should, to be honest with you. It's all about who's going to make a lot of dough, and of course the fight is always over who's going to pay for it. I hear you talk about private investment, and I'm all about that. In fact, the lesser the government and the more the private, the better it is, and has been historically for America. That's been the better combination.
You bet. No, I actually like talking to guys like you because I'm serious. The real issue is exactly what you're talking about, which is that people simply haven't figured out that infrastructure isn't an elite game. Infrastructure is what makes people's lives better. And you've got to really work through this. And I'm going to use the word global again. This is the problem globally. Nobody believes in infrastructure globally anymore because it looks like just a few people benefit in sort of in an outsized way.
For me, when I hear global infrastructure, and listen, I'm not trying to be an adversarial interview, so please understand I respect the dialogue.
That's how I learn.
Well, when I think of global infrastructure, I think of wealth distribution on an international scale, and that monies are being siphoned off of regular working people in the United States. That's my interpretation of it, and so I rail against it. But listen, I don't want to beat you up. He's flashing me 30 seconds and all of that. Do me a favor so folks can draw their own opinion. Tell folks how to find your organization so that they can learn rather than just hearing me.
No, I appreciate it. That's kind of you. It's just go to www.cg-la.com. That's our website, but the more interesting place to go, we have an infrastructure platform, and we're very interested in getting people from all over the country to provide us ideas about the projects that they'd like to see in their communities. So that's www.gvip.io. Sorry for interrupting, but the idea there is that I don't understand why, going back to your point, why elected officials or infrastructure companies are the only ones who come up with ideas about projects.
Norm, I got to stop you because we're literally up against a hard time break. I've got to go. But listen, I want to get you back on because I think there's some things that we need to kick around here, and I'm willing to listen myself. So, folks, Norm, thank you very, very much for joining us. And, folks, we're going to go to a break, and we'll be back with the Enigma Report.
You're listening to the Mike Hewitt Show.
RenegadeRiver.com is new and used firearms, all priced to sell, plus ammo, reloading supplies, optics, clothing, lasers, and yes, tactical gear. RenegadeRiver.com, family owned right here in Michigan, because you deserve it.
This is News Talk 1090 WKBZ and Talk 1230 WTKG.
The Mike Hewitt Show is proudly brought to you by RenegadeRiver.com.
You have arrived to your final destination on your journey through reality. Welcome to the Enigma Report.
We're calling this one the Tale of Two Conservatives because within the conservative movement, honest, good people have been seeing this different for probably forever, but in this instance, we're just going to take you back to the primary briefly and then come forward and look at some other differences that I think we need to, well, what would be the word, put some light on them. So last night, Miles Bauer and I are exchanging Facebook messages. What do they call them, private messages? Is that what it is? We're in a message group, Ludwig and Miles and I, and we're discussing what the Enigma Report will be or what the show will be in general, and of course, a convention that took place yesterday. There was county conventions going on all over the state of Michigan, at least within the GOP for sure, and I'm assuming the Democratic Party also. So we're talking about it, and along the path, Miles, jokes me a little bit. Well, you were a cruiser, and listen, I was a cruiser, and that's kind of an important difference. I wanted to focus on for a second. Back when I predicted that Ted Kennedy is a Freudian. Back when I predicted, back in December when we did the final show of 2015, and I at that point in time I offered 3 predictions, and we've talked about it a couple times since. But one of them was that Trump would be the president. I was a cruiser. I had endorsed him. I supported him. I was campaigning for him. But listen, I harbored a big question in my mind. I really did. So last night in this exchange with Miles Bauer and I and Ludwig watching, or maybe got bored and left.
No, I was watching.
So, but I harbored this thing. I was very concerned about the hypocrisy of it. And the folks that were anti-Trump, or anti-Cruz rather, so many anti-people, and that's part of what we're wanting to talk about today, the folks that were anti-Cruz were saying, wait a minute, you guys were against President Obama because he might have been born somewhere else. You know this man was born somewhere else, and then when you get into the parental issue of citizen, man, it was a tough one. So in my support of Cruz, it was not it wasn't a dismissal of the reality. there was going to be challenges against him. Whether he'd prevail or not is a debate for another show. But in my heart of hearts, I knew that there was some problems there. What I liked about him is that he brought the constitutional dialogue to the arena of ideas. I thought that was important, but I believed all along that Trump would win. I said it on our last show in December of 2015. Part of the problem, though, goes to understanding, in my view, and understanding the processes and how things work. And I've learned the hard way over a long time. I've been on both sides of the political divide within the Republican Party. I think that means I've got both sides shooting at me now. I've come to understand both sides because I've been on both sides. But Miles, what do you think? It's the tale of two conservatives. You and I share so much in common ideologically, but we arrived at two different conclusions early on. What say you?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, you and I were big Reaganistas back in the day. But then, immediately thereafter, there may have been a slight divergence. As I speculated last night, I wonder if after both Bush campaigns and the Clinton presidency, I put forth the hypothesis that Trump never had to be, that had the Tea Party been taken seriously and not been impugned and, made thought of as being crazy, then perhaps this whole Trump experience could have been averted 6 or 7 years back.
But you're a Trump-publican. Why do you think that it could have been averted? It seems like you'd embrace it rather than opining that it could have been averted.
Because, as I explained back during the primaries, Trump became a symbol of my frustration with the establishment that built up over decades.
Right.
I think H.W. betrayed many of the ideas Reagan put forth.
Read my lips.
I think Shrub did the same thing. Obviously, Clinton did as well. So I think we just kind of got tired of hearing, "Oh, you got to send us back. Oh, you can't vote for the other guy." I remember the ringing in my ears why I had to vote for McCain, even though I didn't agree with him.
Right.
Because we don't need Obama. And I've just heard that too many times in my life, that the frustration, I think, kind of boiled over with Romney, when I kind of felt like Romney was just getting shoved down my throat, and that was for me the breaking point.
It's on both sides, though.
It is on all sides, by the way, and that's really why I thought it was an important dialogue. I watched a convention last night with a whole room full of really good people. Honestly, swear to God, good people on both sides of this issue. There was some hurt feelings. There was a lot of angst. Good volunteers, by the way. There's no money flowing in these conventions. It's just good volunteer people trying to make a difference. And there's a process in place. We can all say it was the wrong process. Well, that's a debate for a different time. But when you have new folks to anything, and this goes back to me in 2004 when I primaried a state representative, an incumbent state representative, man, I got taken to school. You know that feeling because you got taken to school. Mm-hmm. 2006 when I lost in an open seat, it's not because my ideology didn't work or did work. It's because the man that won just worked harder. And you got to come and you have to pause and say, why is that? And where I'm going with that little bit of thing, folks, is that I'm one of those fellows where I was about as against Romney as you can possibly be. Back then, Facebook wasn't quite as acidy as it is now, but it was getting close. I was very opposed to Romney. I had people that were Romney supporters unfriend me. People that who supported, in fact, everyone laughed at me at the time because I still was a Herman Cain guy. I'd pick the most conservative leader, and he'd get blown out by the media, and they'd anoint a new person. The media controlled us like puppy dogs.
If you want to talk about a presidential candidate ever being put in place by the media, it was Romney.
Yeah, but here's where I'm going with this. I am willing to support the most conservative that the electorate will allow, and that's my approach in a primary. I think the primary is how we steer the Republican Party, And I think it's how we steer our nation in total, at least from our vantage within the GOP. So I'm very against Romney. I'm very against McPain. As I called him, I still call him McPain. I have pictures with him. I hide him. I don't like the guy. That's a separate issue. Once they became the nominee, because I respect our process, we've talked about this. I don't have to like it. I don't go, I can't tear up. I respect the process. The majority ruled, this is the guy we get. And now I want to beat the socialists and the people that think globalism is wonderful. My push becomes to say, if this is the best I can have, if this is the most conservative the electorate will allow, then I'm going to jump in with that person and ride till the end while I'm doing something else, while I'm investing in this show, and while I'm trying to write books, while I'm out doing grassroots, trying to get folks to understand how the process works so they can be more effective. I think that's key. How can we better steer the GOP? Get involved not as a rancorous attacker, and it's the same for the Democrats, by the way, just so we can talk about this fairly. To get involved and learn how the process works, and if it's wrong, help change it. Don't try to overthrow it. Support the nominee if I don't like him, or if he's going to be better than them. So that's the frustration I think that Miles and I've had, or maybe the difference in the tale of the two conservatives. Because I'm going to always take the most conservative that I can get. Miles reached a point, don't want to put words in your mouth, where you said it's all corrupt, just burn it down. And I think some of the folks last night shared that exact sentiment. So when you said it on Facebook to me privately, I went, that's what these folks are saying. You're right and they're right, but there still has to be a process.
Yeah, but Mike, there is one other evil side to this. Do you remember you and I were going at each other during the primary when Trump would win a state, but Cruz would appropriately grab the elector.
Sure. Well, there's a process.
Right, exactly. But remember, the media was ginning it up so that they could create a frenzy between you and I, okay, so that they could create chaos.
Listen, I got to tell you, we are out of time, so I've got to stop us. There's the music. But folks, both of you, we're going to pick this right up next Wednesday because I think this is a huge, important issue to be wrestled with. I really, really, really do. I think that there's so much angst within all of America, but within the two political parties. Of course, I'm worried about the Republican Party, as I know you two are, and probably most of our listeners. What I want you to do in the meantime, though, is follow us on Twitter.
Hey-o.
Yes. I did it. Follow us on Twitter at Talk Mike Hewitt and on Facebook at / The Mike Hewitt Show, and of course on themikehewitt.com. Folks, thank you very, very, very much for joining us. Miles, Ludwig, and Brian, thank you, folks. See you next week.
Renegade River, guns and ammo, and so much more. Old-fashioned service with surprisingly low prices. On M104 at the top of the new 231 bypass in Utica. Or find us at renegaderiver.com because you deserve it.